Okay, we are now live on YouTube, and I will now one second. Zoom changed their whole format here. Give me a second. I don't know. I'll record. Okay, here we go. Welcome everyone to Pathways Through the Orchard. Tonight we will be learning parshat Korach. We're going to be learning two insights. They're very, very connected one to the other. But we're going to start with trying to understand the motivations behind the rebellion that Korach set in motion. The beginning of the parsha describes in great detail how Korach, through let's call it populist incitement, tried to overthrow Moshe and Aaron. It was a direct challenge to Moshe's and Aaron's leadership. And Moshe, who is the most humble person on the face of the earth, just 2 weeks ago, the Parsha attests to that. Moshe was the most humble person on the face of the earth. But here you see, he fights for his position. You would think someone who's very humble, if you're being challenged. But Moshe understood the danger in this rebellion, and he knew that he was divinely appointed. He didn't appoint himself. And so he took a very strong stand to defend himself. In the end, the rebellion fails, and Korach and his followers are quite literally swallowed up by the earth. Very dramatic. But what I want to start with is trying to understand in a deeper way, what were the motivations of Korach? And I want to state this from the beginning. I'm not trying to whitewash or make excuses or justify what Korach did. That's not what I'm presenting here. But what I do want to do is I want to go deeper into who Korach was and what was fueling his rebellion. And we're going to see that later, it won't be revealed until later, why I would take such a track. So first of all, what we'll call the simple, literal majority weight of opinion is that Korach was jealous. He was power hungry. He was angry. Remember, he's a cousin of Moshe, and he doesn't understand why Moshe and Aaron's sons seem to have all the power in Israel. He's also from a very holy family, and he feels left out and does not want to accept it. And so the usual thing is that he was very cunning. There are many midrashim that talk about how he challenges Moshe. He was very sharp, and he was serious. He wanted to overthrow Moshe and Aaron. So that's how we understand that we'll call it a bad midot. He just, his characteristics somewhere along the line devolved into jealousy, anger, and egotism. But let's put the story into context. Actually, I'll mention a midrash here that he was a Levi. He was from the house of Levi. All the Kohanim are also from the house of Levi. Moshe was a Levi. Aaron was a Levi, but then he was appointed and he became the the family of the Kohanim. But at that point, the Kohanim was Aaron and his two sons. Two of his sons had died already. That was the total of Kohanim. And so the Midrash says that when the Levites were inaugurated into their service, they replaced the firstborn. God chose the Levites to have all of the privileges of the firstborn. And therefore we could follow that and understand in the beginning of the parsha, the main followers of Korach were from the tribe of Reuben. Reuben was the firstborn. And he just lost all of the privileges of the firstborn. So you could understand why they joined the rebellion. Again, I'm not justifying, but we can understand why they were upset. All of the privileges, not just of the family of Yaakov, from like all of history, the firstborn always had special rights and privileges and power. And here they're being replaced. So they're the main followers of Korach. And so when they were inaugurated, the Levites, and Korach was one of them, they had their whole body shaved. That was part of the God-given divine regulations for the inauguration of the Levites. And so the Midrash says that Korach had all of his hair and his entire body shaved off. And when people saw him, they said, "Is this Korach? Like, what happened to you?" And he said, "Look what Moshe did to me." Now that again was an excuse. In a certain way, he was being granted all these privileges for being a Levi. But nonetheless, he used that as an excuse to be angry. And he probably was angry. He probably was embarrassed. And look what Moshe did to me. So let's again look at the context. This parsha follows Parshat Shalach. Parshat Shalach, we know that the spies were sent. They spent 40 days spying the land. They came back with an evil report. And they said that we can't go into the land. They're too strong for us. And there was a rebellion in the camp. People said, let's pick new leaders and let's go back to Egypt. As a result of this, the decree was a year for a day. In other words, they had spied out the land for 40 days. This generation would spend 40 years in the desert until there was a new generation that would be more fitting, at least in God's eyes, to come into the land of Israel. So here we see rebellion already, that people said, let's pick new leaders, go back to Egypt. And then there was a group of Jews that said, we sinned by listening to the spies and agreeing with them that we can't go up into the land. And they said, we're going to go and we're going to start the process of conquering the land. And Moshe says, don't do it. God is not with you, and you will not be successful. They weren't all of Israel. It was actually a sizable group. They were called the Mapilim. And in the end, they did. They tried to force their way into Eretz Yisrael, and they were totally defeated. So here we see a second rebellion. And then in Parshat Shalach, there's the story of the individual called the Mikoshesh Eitzim, who was caught collecting sticks on Shabbat. He was obviously warned, and he continued to do it. So we see that the whole order was somewhat falling apart. Many people say that the Makoshesh Eitzim, he did it on purpose, because here the people are like, we're going to die in the desert. We're going to be stuck here for 40 years. What do we need the Torah for? And so he wanted to show, this is one opinion, he wanted to show that even if they have to spend 40 years in the desert, that doesn't abrogate the Torah. And on Shabbat, you can't gather sticks. And some say that he did it on purpose. And in the end, there was a death penalty for what he did. It was very rare in all of Jewish history for someone to receive the death penalty for breaking Shabbos. But they said that he did so on purpose to show, don't think that the laws of the Torah are abrogated because we're not going into Eretz Yisrael right now. My point here is, here we see rebellion after rebellion before Korach. And so when Korach starts his populist movement, it's in the context of a feeling of almost desperation, that what are we going to do? We're stuck here for 40 years in the desert. Our whole generation, the men between the ages of 20 and 60 are going to die. So there's this spirit of rebellion in the air. So we can understand, and again, I'm trying to be very clear, I'm not justifying. Actually, we're going to see in a minute, that's one of the points I'm going to bring up here. But Korach may have felt that we really do have to replace the leadership here. Like, what's going on here? Who has decreed that we're all going to die in the desert? So we can understand perhaps the justification of Korach. The problem here is that it seems that his personal vendetta against Moshe and Aaron gets woven in to the context of rebellion and his populism. And what does he say? Because we're going to revisit this. He says, all of the people are holy, and God is in their midst. Why, Moshe, have you made yourself greater than everyone else, you and Aaron? God is in the midst of all the people. All the people are holy. So this is a very convincing argument. We call it populism, but you can understand why people would be, yeah, God is in our midst. We all stood at Sinai. We all heard God's voice. Moshe, why have you made yourself greater? So this brings us to one of the ideas that I want to share here, the idea of justification. That this is a very, very powerful force in all of our lives, that the nature of justification usually is when our emotions are aroused, whether it's anger, jealousy, egotism, power hungry, revenge, all of these different things. The way a human being works is, in most cases, we will now intellectually try to justify our feelings. And this, of course, becomes a very, very dangerous thing, because the human mind has the ability to justify almost anything. And that's why when you see throughout world history that some of the worst sins, the worst crimes against humanity, those who are perpetuating them are in their mind, they're justified to do this. So you can see what a big problem this is. So usually, we've learned this before, that the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is very connected to the energy of Amalek. Amalek, the archetypal enemy of the Jewish people. So we've learned that the Baal Shem Tov says that the numerical value of Amalek is 240, which equals Safek, doubt. And so the voice in our head, Amalek is not just an outer force. It's a voice in our head that says, you can't do it. Who do you think you're fooling? You want to be holy? Okay, you'll be holy for a few days and then you're going to fall again. You've tried to change 1,000,000 times. What makes you think that you're going to change this time? That kind of voice in our head. But the Yetzer Hara can work the opposite way through justification. And it can take the worst personality traits and justify our relations with other people, our doing all kinds of things that we shouldn't do, but we find a way to justify it. And so here we could see very, very much a deep strata of what's going on with the story of Korach, is that he seemed to be able to justify his whole rebellion. And along with all of the commentaries, I'm certainly not disputing the idea that he was being fueled by jealousy and anger and egotism and a desire for power. But he was able to dress it up in a way that made sense probably to him and to his followers. Now, the reason that we need to try to understand a deeper aspect of who Korach was, because there is one tradition that until this incident, Korach never did anything wrong in his life. So which is very interesting that we'd have this tradition, and then all of a sudden, he's leading this rebellion against Moshe. But this is to teach us. It says in Pirkei Avot, a person shouldn't trust themselves until the day that they leave this world. In other words, we shouldn't be so sure that we're such a righteous person, that the Yetzer Hara is working overtime. The evil inclination is always working overtime to make us fall. So here we have this tradition that Korach was really a righteous person. And until this whole incident, he seemed not to have done anything wrong. And then we have the teaching from the Arizal, really a startling teaching from the Arizal, where he says that in the future, Korach will be the Kohen Gadol. Where does he get such a thing? So he actually sees it. Now remember, the Arizal received his teachings with Ruach HaKodesh, with divine inspiration. But he looked at a verse that says, Tzaddik ketamar yifrach. A righteous person will sprout like a date palm. The date palm is the tree of majesty in Eretz Yisrael. It represents majesty. It actually appeared on many of the coins of ancient Israel. So the Arizal said, look at the last letters of these three words. Tzaddik, the last letter is a kuf. Kitamar is a resh. Yifrach. The last letter is a chet. So Kuf Resh Chet spell Korach. That in the future he will sprout and will be righteous again. He'll be righteous again. So this idea is a bit of a startling idea, but the implication here is a very deep implication. That, and it goes along with this midrash, that until this incident, Korach never did anything wrong. And so here you see, and he died in the process. He challenged Moshe to the end, and Moshe gave him an opportunity to, step down, to get off the high branch that he had put himself on. But Korach did not take it, and he pursued the rebellion to the end, and he was literally swallowed up by the earth. But when we see the statement that he made, and this is what the Arizal brings down and Hasidut talks about, when he said, all of the people are holy, and God is in their midst. So he was expressing a vision of the future. He saw that this was a truism, that all the people are truly holy. God is in the midst of all of the people. And therefore, in a certain way, why would anyone put themselves above anyone else? And we're told that this was a messianic vision. The Kotzker Rebbe was known for his very sharp statements. And he said, my holy Zedi Korach. He used to call Korach my holy grandfather because of this statement. Because he had this vision of the future, and he was trying to draw it down into the present. Moshe and Aaron, we are all holy. And this, in a certain way, takes away from the idea that he personally was trying to replace Moshe and Aaron. He was, but he also saw a vision that it bothered him that anyone saw themselves on a higher level. Not that Moshe saw himself on a higher level. Again, he was the most humble person on the face of the earth. So here we can understand, because of the statement in the Midrash, the statement of the Arizal, of the Kotzker Rebbe, that there is really another side of Korach that we have to take into consideration. And this goes along with a statement we've made many, many, many times, is that all of the great figures in the Bible, the spiritual giants, Avram, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, the tribes, all the figures in the Tanakh, in the Bible, these holy, righteous people, but all of them were human beings. All of them made mistakes. All of them had faults. All of them had to deal with crises and obstacles and had moments of weakness. And the sages point this out. In the Talmud, in the Midrash, there's no personality in the Bible that is spared a certain amount of what's called bikoret, of investigation into all of their deeds. So here with Korach also, here it seems that his baser emotions got too much of his attention. He allowed it to overtake his intellect. He came to justify what he was doing. And yet, in a certain way, the statement of the Arizal is we don't like throw Korach into the dustpan of history because he made a mistake, a huge mistake. There's no doubt about it. And again, he paid with his life. But we don't totally reject this. And where do we see this? Probably the most obvious example is with King David. David HaMelech, if you read the whole story of David HaMelech, he was a very high, exalted, elevated neshama. Mashiach comes from David. The kingship comes from David. But when you read the story, David had some pretty raw emotions. He made some major mistakes in his life that he paid dearly for. He paid dearly for. But we see that in God's eyes, he never rejected David. In other words, it's the same that we would want from God for ourselves. Because we all make mistakes. We all allow our emotions to get the best of us. We, 1 minute, we're the most righteous in the world, and the next minute, we're teetering with a lack of faith or our baser emotions. And so we would want God to also be forgiving with us. We all mean the best, we want the best, but we have our faults, we fall. And so here with David, we see that ultimately God not only didn't reject him, but he made the everlasting kingship come from David. And so here we could see that the Arizal, in a certain way, is taking the same track with Korach, not justifying what he did. Moshe did absolutely right by standing up to him. It would have been a disaster if Korach would have taken over. But here we're just getting a different view, a wider view. And so when Korach says all the people are holy and God is in their midst, so this reminds me of one of my favorite statements. I've said this a number of times in different classes from Reb Shlomo, where he would say, not every Jew is holy, but every Jew is the holy of holiest. What did he mean by this? On the surface, and not just the surface, in reality, not every Jew is holy. There are many, many people who do many not right things. But in the core, in the inner point of the soul, every Jew is the holy of holiest in potential. This was a very important teaching from Reb Shlomo. And so this is, he almost took what Korach was saying one step further. Not only is every Jew holy, but he was saying every Jew is the holy of holiest. But on the surface and in people's actions and thoughts and speech, no, not every Jew is holy. And even those who are holy have their moments that they're not so holy. So here we're just trying to see a fuller picture of not just Korach, it's speaking about us. It's speaking about us, and especially this idea of justification, that we all do this. We all have ways of justifying things that we maybe shouldn't be thinking or saying or doing. So we should keep this in mind and not allow just carte blanche to the power of justification to justify just about anything. So like everything in the Torah, there's a bit of Korach in all of us. There's a little bit of rebelliousness in all of us, and there's a little bit of ego and jealousy and anger in all of us also. But hopefully we can learn to overcome these things and really merit the idea that we are all holy and God is in our midst. So the second insight is very, very connected to this. It's almost like a continuation, but it will have a different theme. And that's the idea that one of the midrashim that is trying to understand where is Korach coming from. So one of them says that Korach, again, he was a very high neshama, that he had a certain level of prophecy, and he saw that in the future, the prophet Shmuel would come from his line, from his lineage, would come Shmuel, and many of the sons of Korach who are found in the Psalms. If you look in the Psalms, and I'll mention the exact ones, Psalm 42, 44 through 49, 84, 85, 87, and 88 are all attributed to Bnei Korach, the sons of Korach. So the Midrash says that Korach looked into the future and he saw all of these great people coming from him. What's interesting is we know very little about the lineage of Moshe. Very little. And so Korach, again, with prophetic insight, is, well, look at the lineage of Moshe and look at my lineage. So he justified, I should rule now. Why is Moshe ruling? I'm on a higher level. So that's what the Midrash says. And one of the verses that he saw prophetically is the 99th Psalm. And what's interesting is the Psalms 90 through 100 are attributed to Moshe. And in this psalm, we sing it every Kabbalat Shabbat, every Friday night. This is one of the Psalms that's part of Kabbalat Shabbat, the 99th Psalm. And it says, Moshe v'Aaron b'kohanav, u'Shmuel b'korei shemo. Moshe and Aaron, the priests of God, and Shmuel, who called upon God's name. So here, in other teachings, we see Shmuel is compared to Moshe and Aaron. Shmuel was also a very righteous person, one of the greatest of all the judges. He was actually in a transition period between the judges and the prophets. And he was actually called a ro'eh, a visionary. But Shmuel was, he anointed the first two kings. He anointed Saul, Shaul, and David. He anointed David. So Shmuel was at such a high level. So here again, Korach is saying, whoa, Shmuel, my descendant, is being compared to Moshe and Aaron. So I should also be compared to Moshe and Aaron. I should also be in a position of power. But what he didn't see is that all these figures that he sees, Shmuel and the Bnei Korach, are coming from his sons. Now, what happens here is Korach and his family and his followers are swallowed up by the earth. So we would think that this included the sons of Korach. But we're told that the sons of Korach actually didn't agree with what their father was doing. And so the Midrash says that when the earth collapsed and they were all swallowed up in the earth, that like these pillars, however we understand this is some symbolic midrashic language, these pillars rose up and stopped the fall of the Bnei Korach. And so the sons of Korach didn't die. And later in Parshat Pinchas, later in the book of Numbers, it's going through the lineage of the first, through the lineage of the different tribes. And it starts with Reuven. And as I said, the main followers of Korach were from the tribe of Reuven, especially Datan v'Aviram. And so in Parshat Pinchas, it mentions in the lineage of Reuven, but it mentions that Datan and Aviram, so they were among those who were following Korach, and that the earth swallowed them up. But then it says, "U'bnei Korach lo metu." It says explicitly. So the Midrash is really basing itself on the text. It says explicitly, even though we would think that they all died. Here it says specifically, "U'bnei Korach lo metu." And so Shmuel and all of the Bnei Korach who wrote the Psalms, they're coming from the sons of Korach, and not really from Korach himself. But that he didn't see. He saw all of these great people, and he used that to justify his actions, but he didn't see that his sons were saved because they didn't agree with him. They didn't share the same fate. So this brings us to the subject I want to talk about, is what's called unclear prophecy. That there is clear prophecy, and we're told the only one who had absolute clear prophecy was Moshe Rabbeinu. And it's described that he looked through an asplakaria ha'meira, through a clear pane, a translucent pane. All the other prophets saw through an asplakaria lo meira, a somewhat like a frosted window, not totally, and you couldn't see anything, but a kind of a window that you could see the images on the other side, but it's not exactly clear. And so we're told that that was the difference between Moshe and all the other prophets, that even though the words of the prophets, so many of them were based on the people's actions. In other words, the good prophecies from the prophets, again, we're not saying that because it wasn't absolutely clear that they weren't true. We know that because right now, here in Israel, we are living proof of the words of the prophets. Everything that the prophets said would happen, the ingathering of the exiles, the rebuilding of the cities, sovereignty, the rebuilding of Jerusalem, the land, the desert turning green and productive. All of these were the prophecies. So it's not like they didn't see clearly, but there is this idea of what's called unclear prophecy. So that's what I want to explore now, because Korach had unclear prophecy. He saw something clearly, but it wasn't completely clearly. So let's just go through a number of examples in the Torah But we also have this idea of unclear prophecy, where someone sees something and there's a reality to it, a truth to it, but it's not completely clear, therefore not completely manifest. And here's just a few examples. The astrologers of Potiphar, of Pharaoh. So they come to Pharaoh and say, we can see in the stars a redeemer is about to be born to Israel, and he will redeem Israel. So Egypt has a big problem. How are they going to stop this? And the astrologers say the redeemer, he will be judged through water. And so this leads to Pharaoh saying, drown all of the male children until the astrologers will see that the danger is past. And that's the basis of Pharaoh's decree to drown all of the male children. What they didn't see is they saw that he would be judged through water, but it wasn't clear. What they saw clearly that a redeemer was about to be born. That was Moshe. Excuse me. What they didn't see was that the judgment through water is when Moshe hit the rock to bring forth water, and through that he received a judgment that he could not come into Eretz Yisrael. So they saw somewhat clearly, but obviously not totally clearly. And we actually have the tradition that when Moshe was put into the Nile, so then the astrologers were like, the danger is past. They didn't see, they saw that he was put into the water. They didn't see that the daughter of Pharaoh would actually save Moshe. So that's an example of unclear prophecy. Another one is the wife of Potiphar. In the Torah, we see that the wife of Potiphar is doing everything she can to entice Yosef. And according to the simple literal meaning, she's driven by total desire and passion. The Torah says that Yosef was beautiful, and everything that he touched was successful. Here he's in the position of a slave, but nonetheless, the wife of Potiphar sees his potential. And according to tradition, she is driven by pure, raw desire, but she also had we'll call it a prophetic vision that she would have children with Yosef, that she was meant to be with Yosef. I'll take back the children thing, that she was meant to be with Yosef. And so the Arizal explains that, like everyone, like we talked about Korach in the beginning of the class, everyone has what we'll call a good side and a more negative side. So the negative side of Potiphar is being driven by pure raw desire. There was a good side of Potiphar, that she was attracted to the spiritual nature of Yosef, not just his physicality, that she saw his potential, and she felt prophetically that she was meant to be with him. So the Arizal explains that later Yosef, part of the soul of Yehoshua, of Joshua, was the soul of Yosef. And that part of the soul of Rachav is actually the Haftorah from this past Shabbat. This is when we conquer Jericho. And this woman, Rachav, so she gives safety to the spies that were sent. And she works out a deal that her family would be saved because she sees that Israel is meant to conquer the land and that God is the true God. So according to tradition, Joshua actually marries Rachav. So the Arizal explains this is what the wife of Potiphar saw. She saw she was meant to be with Yosef. But here it took another lifetime for that to evolve. So here again, she thought she was seeing clearly in this lifetime, but it was unclear, but it was partly true. With Yaakov, we have many, many examples. When he tells his children, Radu, go down to Egypt. And so Rashi explains that the word Radu, go down, is Gematria 210, which is the exact amount of times that we actually spent in Egypt, 210 years. Another one with Yaakov is when he sent Yosef to check on the peace of his brothers. It says he sent him from the Emek Hebron, from the valley of Hebron. So a classic Rashi states, what does this mean? Hebron is not in the valley, it's in the mountains. So what could it possibly mean that he sent them from the valley of Hebron? So Rashi explains that the word valley, emek, is also the same word as deep. That's why a valley is called emek, because it's deep. And he says that he sent him as the question to this day is, did he know in clear prophecy or unclear prophecy what he was sending Yosef to do? We assume it was unclear prophecy because he mourns for him for 22 years. Now, it could be that he was mourning him because he understood that we're meant to go down to Egypt. The question is, when he sent Yosef, did he know that he was starting the process through which the Egyptian exile would happen? Because from him sending Yosef, he was sold into slavery, and eventually the brothers come down, and the whole story of how everyone went down to Egypt. And so Rashi explains, Emek Hebron, who's buried in Hebron? Avraham. And Avram was the one who heard the prophecy from God at the covenant of the pieces, Brit Ben Abitarim, that your descendants will go down into exile. So when it says that he sent Yosef from Emek Hebron, the question to this day is, did he know clearly what he was setting in process, or it was like unclear prophecy? He did it and he didn't even understand the ramifications of what he was saying or doing. It also is brought down, Rashi brings down, when the brothers bring back a coat that they had dipped in the blood of a goat. And they said to him, do you recognize this? They didn't want to come out and tell him what they had done. And Yaakov says, a wild animal has eaten him. And Rashi says an amazing thing. He says he saw in unclear prophecy the wife of Potiphar, with her wild desires, was going to pounce on Yosef, and Yosef would end up in jail for 12 years. So Rashi brings down again that he saw, but not 100% clearly. It was unclear prophecy. Another example is the prophet Jonah. You know the whole story. He tries to run away from God. In the end, he ends up going to Nineveh, and he delivers the message from God that says, in 3 days, Nineveh will be overturned. That's what he told the people of Nineveh. They recognized that he was a true prophet, and they did tshuva, they fasted, they put on sackcloth and ashes, and they did tshuva. And it's brought down, the Ramchal brings down that this was an example that even a true prophet cannot 100% understand his own prophecy. And that was when he said, in 3 days, Nineveh will be overturned. So it turned out to be true, but it was overturned in tshuva, that the people did tshuva, and therefore the decree was overturned. So this is a little bit different type of unclear prophecy. And we'll end with just one more, with Yitzchak. When Yitzchak wants to give a blessing to Esav before he dies. And then we know the whole story that Yaakov, at his mother's urging, dresses up like Esav, and he receives the blessing. But everyone asks, why would Yitzchak want to bless Esav? And so before that, it says that Yitzchak loved Esav because there was hunt in his mouth. What does that mean? The literal understanding is that Esav was a hunter. And he loved Esav because Esav would hunt and bring back types of food that he really loved. And therefore, he had hunt in his mouth. That's, in a certain way, a very superficial kind of understanding of who Yitzchak was. So it's explained in Chassidut. What does it mean there was hunt in Yitzchak's mouth? He was hunting for sparks of holiness in Esav. He saw tremendous potential in Esav, tremendous potential. But he saw that Esav was a bit off the derech. He was going on a crooked road, but he saw his potential. And so they asked, well, what sparks of holiness did he see? So they say he saw Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir, both the two great luminaries of among the sages, the greatest, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Meir. They were from families of proselytes, of Gerim, from Esav. So it says that Yitzchak saw, it's very much like Korach. He saw that Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir would come from Esav. But what he didn't see is that if you remember, Yaakov gets his name because he was holding onto the heel of Esav. So one of the explanations is he was holding on to the sparks of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir. And the Arizal brings down that one of the parts of the soul of Rabbi Akiva was Yaakov. And actually the name Akiva and Yaakov are virtually the same, except there's an aleph in Akiva. So in a certain way, Yaakov was closer to Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir than Esav was. But Yitzchak didn't see this, but he saw clearly enough to see that Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir would come from Esav. So here we're gonna wrap this up by going back to Korach. And again, he sees Shmuel, the B'nai Korach, great souls would come from him, but he didn't see it clearly. And he also saw this idea that all the people are holy and God is in their midst. This was a messianic vision. And in a sense, he saw that clearly. What he didn't see clearly was that now, in his time, the world wasn't ready for that. That he didn't see clearly. So, actually, I'll mention one more, because we spoke about David before, King David, and how God forgave him for all of his misdeeds. But we also know that the way that David did tshuva, he paved the way for all of Israel to do tshuva. And so it says that when he went up to the roof and he saw Bathsheba, he saw clearly that this is my bat zug. The sages say, from the 6 days of creation. David saw clearly, this is my soulmate. He had many, many wives, but he saw, this is my soulmate. But what he didn't see clearly was the idea that he needed to wait to be able to marry Bathsheba in a more proper manner. And he had a tremendous fall because of this. So again, you see this idea of unclear prophet where you see something clearly, but not totally clearly. And in the case of Korach, in the case of David, it led to real problems. So this is another aspect of the story of Korach. So tonight we really looked at the deeper motivations, the deeper feelings of Korach, the context of the rebellions happening because of the decree of 40 years in the desert, and the idea of justification. And all of this applies to ourselves also. Many times we also see something, like we call it through intuition. We see something very clearly, but we always have to make sure that it's not unclear prophecy that we're experiencing. And we have to be very, very careful with these premonitions that we have to be able to tell the difference whether we should follow or not follow, and which parts are totally real and which parts we need to think twice about. Anyways, we should all merit to, at the time of Mashiach, we're told that prophecy will return. And the prophet said that the time of Mashiach, that we will see visions, we will see clear prophecy, and everyone will see God clearly. May we live to see it.